The stars had always called to humanity. For centuries, people looked up at the night sky and dreamed of what lay beyond. By the year 2247, those dreams had become reality. Humans had built ships that could cross the vast distances between stars. They had planted colonies on distant worlds. They had become a spacefaring species. The Earth starship Endeavour was one of the finest vessels ever built. She was 300 meters long, with a hull of reinforced titanium and engines that could push her to speeds that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations. Her mission was simple. She would travel to the edge of the Orion Arm and survey uncharted regions of space. It was supposed to be routine. Captain Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge as the Endeavour prepared to depart from Earth orbit. He was 42 years old, with gray starting to show at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent staring into the void. He had commanded ships for 20 years, and the Endeavour was his greatest achievement. Behind him stood his trusted officers. Laura Mitchell was his chief engineer, a woman who could coax miracles from machines that should have failed. Stephen Grant served as first officer, calm and steady in any crisis. Ran the science division, her brilliant mind always seeking new discoveries. The crew numbered 340 souls. They were explorers, scientists, engineers, and dreamers. They had families waiting for them back on Earth. They had plans for what they would do when they returned. None of them knew that they would never come home in the way they expected. The Endeavour jumped to faster than light speed and vanished into the darkness between stars. For 3 months, everything went according to plan. The ship surveyed 17 new star systems. They discovered 2 planets that might one day support human colonies. They collected data that would keep scientists busy for decades. Captain Brooks sent regular reports back to Earth, and Earth sent messages of congratulation in return. Then the Endeavour detected something strange. It came from a region of space that should have been empty. Sensors picked up energy readings that made no sense. The patterns did not match anything in the databases. They did not match any known natural phenomenon. They did not match any technology that humans or any other known species possessed. Studied the readings for hours. She could not explain them. She could only say that something was out there, something that the laws of physics as humanity understood them. Captain Brooks made a decision. He ordered the Endeavour to investigate. It was what explorers did. It was why they had traveled so far from home. The ship changed course and moved toward the anomaly. As they drew closer, the energy readings grew stronger. The crew felt strange sensations. Some reported hearing music that seemed to come from nowhere. Others saw colors at the edges of their vision that had no names. Laura Mitchell noticed that her engines were behaving oddly, producing more power than they should have been capable of generating. Then space itself seemed to tear open in front of them. A rift appeared, a wound in reality that blazed with light that hurt to look upon. The Endeavour tried to pull away, but the rift pulled at them like a whirlpool pulling at a small boat. Captain Brooks ordered full reverse thrust. It was not enough. The ship tumbled forward, spinning end over end, and fell into the light. And then there was silence. Back on Earth, the United Earth Navy waited for the Endeavour's next scheduled report. It never came. They sent messages to the ship. There was no response. They dispatched search vessels to the Endeavour's last known position. Those ships found nothing. No wreckage. No escape pods. No bodies. No distress beacon. The Endeavour had simply ceased to exist. The search continued for 18 months. Ships combed every sector the Endeavour might have reached. Probes scanned every asteroid and moon. Scientists analyzed every scrap of data, looking for some clue about what had happened. They found nothing. Finally, the United Earth Navy declared the Endeavour lost with all hands. A memorial service was held in Geneva. The names of 340 crew members were carved into the Wall of the Fallen, where humanity honored those who had given their lives exploring the stars. Families wept. Friends mourned. The world moved on, but the mystery of the Endeavour remained. 47 years passed. In those decades, humanity changed. They expanded to 12 colony worlds. They built bigger ships and better weapons. But they also discovered that they were not alone in the universe, and that the universe was not friendly. The Dominion controlled a vast empire spanning hundreds of star systems. They were tall and gray-skinned, with eyes like black stones and minds that valued only power and conquest. They had destroyed dozens of species before encountering humanity. They viewed humans as pests to be exterminated. War came slowly at first: border skirmishes, colony raids, diplomatic insults. Then they attacked in force. Human fleets met them in battle and lost. Colony after colony fell. Millions died. Humanity retreated toward Earth, toward the world where their species had been born, to make a final stand. Admiral George commanded what remained of the human fleet. He was an old man now, with white hair and tired eyes. He had fought for 15 years and had watched humanity lose ground with every battle. He knew the numbers. He knew that when they came for Earth, humanity would not be able to stop them. Then, on a cold December morning, something impossible happened. Sensors at the edge of the solar system detected an anomaly. Space rippled and tore, just as it had 47 years before in a distant region of the Orion Arm. A ship emerged from the rift. Its silhouette was familiar but wrong. The hull shimmered with colors that did not exist in nature. Strange patterns covered its surface, pulsing with soft blue light. Admiral stared at the sensor data. He checked it twice. He checked it 3 times. His hands trembled as he realized what he was looking at. It was the Endeavour. She had returned. The ship that had vanished 47 years ago had come back, but she was no longer the vessel that had left Earth orbit on a routine survey mission. She was something else now, something more. And humanity, facing extinction at the hands of had just received what might be their only hope of survival. Admiral opened a communication channel, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. He spoke the words that would change history. "Endeavour, this is Admiral of the United Earth Navy. Please respond." The response came in a voice that recordings confirmed belonged to a man who should have been dead for nearly half a century. "Admiral, this is Captain Daniel Brooks. We have come home, and we have brought gifts." Admiral George stood on the observation deck of the Mars command station and watched the Endeavour approach. His heart beat fast in his chest. His mind struggled to accept what his eyes were showing him. The ship that drifted toward them was both familiar and alien at the same time. The basic shape was still recognizable. The Endeavour had the same general outline as the day she vanished, but everything else had changed. The hull no longer reflected light the way metal should. It seemed to shift and shimmer, as if it existed in more than one place at once. Strange geometric patterns covered every surface, glowing with a soft blue radiance that pulsed like a heartbeat. Energy readings from the ship made no sense. The sensors could not even classify what they were detecting. Commander Lisa Warren stood beside the Admiral. She was young, only 35, and had grown up hearing stories of the lost Endeavour. To her, the ship was a legend, a ghost story that cadets told each other in hushed voices. Now that legend floated before her, very real and very strange. She opened a channel and spoke. "Endeavour, you are cleared to dock at Station Alpha. Please proceed at minimal thrust." The response came in that same impossible voice. "Acknowledged, station control. Beginning approach." The Endeavour moved with a grace that should not have been possible for a ship her size. She slid into the docking bay without a single correction, positioning herself with perfect precision. The station crew watched in silence. Many of them were crying. Some were praying. All of them understood that they were witnessing something that would be remembered for as long as humanity existed. The airlock opened. Captain Daniel Brooks stepped through first. He looked exactly as he had in the photographs taken 47 years ago. His hair was still dark, with just a touch of gray at the temples. His face still bore the same confident expression. He wore a uniform that resembled the old Earth Navy design, but with subtle differences that marked it as something new. Behind him came his officers. Laura Mitchell walked with the easy stride of someone who understood machines at a level most engineers could only dream of. Stephen Grant surveyed the station with calm, assessing eyes, smiled at the assembled crowd as if greeting old friends at a reunion. Admiral stepped forward. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Captain Brooks, you were declared dead 47 years ago." Brooks nodded. He understood the confusion, the disbelief, the fear. He had expected all of it. "I know, Admiral. For you it has been 47 years. For us it has been 3. Time does not flow the same way in the place where we have been." The Admiral had 1,000 questions. Everyone did. But Brooks raised his hand gently. "We will explain everything. But first I need you to understand something. We know we know that they are coming. And we know that without help humanity will not survive. That is why we have returned." The meeting took place in the station's main conference room. Admiral gathered his senior staff. Representatives from the United Earth Council joined through secure communication links. They all stared at Captain Brooks and his officers with expressions that mixed hope with suspicion. Laura Mitchell spoke first. She explained what had happened when the Endeavour fell through the rift all those years ago. The ship had tumbled into a dimension that existed outside normal space and time. There, they had encountered beings that called themselves the Architects. The Architects were old beyond human comprehension. They had existed before the first stars formed. They had watched the universe grow from nothing to everything. Over billions of years, they had collected the knowledge and wisdom of 1 trillion civilizations. They existed to preserve that knowledge and to share it with species they deemed worthy. Continued the explanation. The Architects had observed humanity for a long time. They had seen our wars and our cruelty, but they had also seen our art and our compassion. They had watched us reach for the stars despite every obstacle. They had decided that humans possess something rare and valuable, a spark of potential that deserved to be nurtured. Captain Brooks spoke next. The Architects gave us a choice. We could return to our own dimension and forget everything we had seen, or we could stay and learn. We could let them teach us, transform us, and give us the tools to help our species survive and grow. We chose to stay. For 3 years, the crew of the Endeavour had studied under the Architects. They had learned sciences that humanity would not discover for. They had been changed. Their minds expanded to comprehend concepts that would drive ordinary humans insane. And they had been given technology that bordered on magic. Stephen Grant listed some of what the Endeavour now carried. Weapons that could fold space itself, crushing enemy ships into points of infinite density. Shields that existed across multiple dimensions, making the ship nearly impossible to hit. Engines that did not push against space but stepped around it, allowing travel at speeds that mocked the concept of limits. Medical technology that could heal almost any wound and extend life far beyond natural spans. The council members listened in stunned silence. Some looked skeptical, others looked terrified. A few looked like they were about to cry with relief. Admiral asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Why should we trust you? How do we know that you are still human? How do we know that these Architects have not turned you into weapons that will be used against us?" Captain Brooks met his gaze without flinching. "You cannot know for certain. We understand your fear. If our positions were reversed, we would feel the same way. All I can tell you is that we are still the same people who left Earth 47 years ago. We still love our home. We still care about our species. The only difference is that now we have the power to protect what we love." Laura Mitchell offered a demonstration. She produced a small device from her pocket and activated it. The air above the conference table shimmered, and suddenly they were looking at a perfect replica of Earth, floating in miniature before them. The hologram showed every detail, from the continents to the weather patterns to the ships orbiting above. "This is nothing," she said quietly. "A toy. A fraction of what we can do. The real technologies are aboard the Endeavor. They are waiting to help defend your world." The council debated for hours. Voices rose and fell. Arguments for and against trusting the returned crew echoed through the chamber. But in the end, there was really only one choice. They were coming. Humanity was losing. If the Endeavor could truly do what its crew claimed, it was the only hope left. Admiral stood and faced Captain Brooks. He extended his hand. "On behalf of the United Earth Council, welcome home, Captain. What do you need from us?" Brooks shook the offered hand firmly. "Just point us at the enemy, Admiral. We will handle the rest." Outside the station windows, the Endeavor waited, her hull pulsing with quiet light. She had journeyed beyond the boundaries of reality itself. She had been transformed into something unprecedented, and now she had come home to save the world that had built her. The war for humanity's survival was about to change. Part 3. The Gathering Storm. News of the Endeavor's return spread across human space within hours. It traveled through official channels and unofficial ones. It passed from ship to ship, from colony to colony, from whispered conversations to shouted celebrations. For the first time in years, people dared to hope. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets of every major city. They watched news feeds showing the impossible ship docked at Mars Station. They saw the face of Captain Daniel Brooks, unchanged despite nearly 5 decades. They heard the promises of salvation and wondered if they could be true. On the colony worlds, the reaction was even more intense. These were the people who lived on the front lines of the war. They had buried friends and family. They had watched ships descend from the sky and bring death. For them, hope was not a luxury. It was a desperate need. But not everyone celebrated. In the council chambers on Earth, voices of caution spoke loudly. Senator Harold Perry stood before the assembly and raised his concerns. He was an older man with a sharp mind and a suspicious nature. He had survived in politics for 40 years by never trusting anything he could not verify. "We are being asked to place the future of our species in the hands of a ship and crew that we cannot understand," he said. "These people claim to have been transformed by alien beings we have never encountered. They carry technology that our best scientists cannot even begin to analyze. How do we know this is not a trap? How do we know they have not captured these people and sent them back as weapons against us?" Others agreed. General Nancy spoke next. She commanded the defense forces of Earth itself and had spent her career preparing for the worst. "Even if their intentions are good, we cannot verify their claims. We cannot test their weapons without potentially revealing our capabilities to the enemy. We cannot integrate their technology into our forces because we do not understand how it works. We are being asked to gamble everything on faith." Captain Brooks listened to these concerns with patience. He had expected them. He understood that trust had to be earned, not demanded. When the senators finished speaking, he rose to respond. "You are right to be cautious," he said. "In your position, I would feel the same way, but I must ask you a question. What alternative do you have? The fleet is gathering. Our intelligence suggests they will attack within weeks. Your forces have lost every major engagement for the past 5 years. Your colonies are falling one by one. If you reject our help, what is your plan for survival?" The chamber fell silent. No one had an answer because there was no answer. Without the Endeavor, humanity would fall. Everyone knew it, even if some did not want to admit it. Offered a compromise. She suggested a demonstration. The Endeavor would perform a series of tests that would show its capabilities without revealing the full extent of its power. The Council could observe and judge for themselves whether the ship could do what its crew claimed. The demonstration took place 3 days later in a secured region of space between Mars and Jupiter. A dozen human warships formed an observation ring around an area of empty space. Inside that ring, the Endeavor floated alone, her hull shimmering with that strange light that never seemed to fade. Laura Mitchell controlled the test from the engineering station. She started simple. The Endeavour accelerated from a standing stop to half the speed of light in less than 1 second. No human ship could match that. No human ship could survive the forces involved. The Endeavour did it without any visible strain. Next came the weapons test. A series of target drones had been placed at various distances. Stephen Grant activated the main weapon array. Beams of light that somehow looked solid lanced out from the Endeavour's hull. Each beam struck its target with perfect accuracy. The drones did not explode. They did not melt. They simply ceased to exist, compressed into points so small that they vanished from detection. The final test was the most impressive. Activated the dimensional shields. The observation ships fired their weapons at the Endeavour. Missiles, energy beams, kinetic rounds, everything the human fleet could throw came racing toward the ship. None of it connected. The attacks seemed to pass through the Endeavour as if she were not there. In a sense, she was not. The shields had shifted the ship slightly out of phase with normal reality. For those brief moments, she existed in the spaces between dimensions, untouchable by any conventional weapon. When the demonstration ended, the Council voted unanimously to accept the Endeavour's help. Meanwhile, far from human space, the Dominion prepared for its final assault. High Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devastation, and reviewed the reports from his spies. He had learned of the returned human vessel. He had heard the wild claims about impossible technology. He did not believe them. Had conquered 17 species in his long career. He had heard many desperate races make many desperate claims. They always spoke of secret weapons, hidden allies, and divine interventions. They always fell in the end. Humans would be no different. He gave the order. 300 warships of the fleet began their journey toward Earth. Each ship bristled with weapons capable of destroying planets. Each carried troops trained in the brutal art of extermination. The fleet moved through space like a wave of death, unstoppable and inevitable. Back in the solar system, Captain Brooks received the intelligence reports. He stood on the bridge of the Endeavour and studied the enemy fleet's composition and trajectory. His officers gathered around him. New faces had joined them, young men and women from the modern Earth Navy who had volunteered to serve aboard the legendary ship. Lieutenant Peter Collins manned the navigation station. He was 26 years old and had grown up reading stories about the Endeavour's disappearance. Now he served on her bridge, still not quite believing his luck. Ensign Maria Santos handled communications. She was even younger, just 23, with dark eyes that burned with determination. She had lost her parents to a raid when she was a child. This was personal for her. Captain Brooks looked at his mixed crew, the old and the new standing together. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The fate of humanity rested on this ship and on the people who crewed her. He spoke quietly. "They are coming. 300 ships against one. They think we are no threat. They think this will be easy." His voice hardened. "They are wrong. We did not travel beyond the edges of reality just to watch our species die. We came back to save our people. And that is exactly what we are going to do." The Endeavour rose from her position near Mars and began moving toward the outer solar system. Her crew prepared for battle. Her weapons charged with energies that existed in no human database. Her shields hummed with power drawn from dimensions that human scientists could not name. The final battle for humanity's future was about to begin. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. 300 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation, a wall of metal and death stretching across millions of kilometers. Their hulls were black as night, covered with weapons that had burned worlds to ash. Their engines glowed with the sickly green light that humans had learned to fear. High Commander stood on the bridge of the Devastation and surveyed his forces with satisfaction. This was the moment he had waited for. After years of fighting, humanity would finally be crushed. Their worlds would burn. Their survivors would serve as slaves. Their name would be forgotten. He ordered a broadcast sent to Earth. Humans of Sol system, your time has ended. Your fleets have fallen. Your colonies are ashes. There is no hope. There is no escape. Surrender now and some of you may live as servants of the Dominion. Resist and you will be erased from existence. You have 1 hour to respond. The response came not from Earth, but from a single ship that moved out from the inner system to face the Armada. The Endeavor advanced alone, her hull pulsing with soft blue light, her size dwarfed by the massive vessels. She looked like a small fish swimming toward a school of sharks. Laughed when he saw the sensor readings. One ship. They send one ship to face my fleet. These humans are more foolish than I thought. He turned to his tactical officer. Destroy it. Show them what happens to those who defy the Dominion. The forward weapons of 50 ships opened fire simultaneously. Energy beams capable of melting mountains lanced through space. Missiles designed to crack planets roared toward the Endeavor. It was enough firepower to destroy a moon. None of it hit. The Endeavor simply was not there when the weapons arrived. She flickered, shifted, and the attacks passed through empty space. To the sensors, it looked like the ship had briefly ceased to exist, then reappeared exactly where she had been. On the Endeavor's bridge, Captain Daniel Brooks stood at the center of the command platform. His mind was connected to the ship through interfaces that the architects had built into his nervous system. He could feel every system, every weapon, every shield. The ship was an extension of his body. Stephen Grant tracked enemy positions on the tactical display. His enhanced brain processed data faster than any computer. He identified the devastation as the command ship and marked it as a priority target. Laura Mitchell channeled power through systems that operated on principles no human had discovered. The engines drew energy from the quantum vacuum itself, an infinite well that could never run dry. Monitored the dimensional shields, keeping the ship phased just slightly out of normal reality. Enemy weapons could not touch what they could not reach. Captain Brooks gave the order, begin. The Endeavor struck. She accelerated to speeds that should have been impossible, crossing the distance to the fleet in seconds. Her weapons fired as she moved, beams of compressed spacetime that tore through enemy shields like paper through fire. The first ship did not explode. It collapsed inward, crushed by forces that folded space around it until nothing remained but a speck of matter. The second ship suffered the same fate, then the third, then 10 more. Watched in disbelief as his vessels died. "This is not possible," he whispered. "Nothing can do this." He screamed orders at his fleet. "All ships concentrate fire on that vessel. Destroy it at any cost." 250 ships turned their weapons on the Endeavor. The space around her filled with death. Energy beams crossed and recrossed. Missiles flew in clouds so thick they blocked the stars. It was the greatest concentration of firepower that had ever unleashed against a single target. The Endeavor danced through it all. She moved between the attacks like a ghost, always where the weapons were not. When she could not dodge, her shields shifted her out of phase, letting the attacks pass through harmlessly. And all the while, her own weapons continued to fire. Ships died by the dozens. Some collapsed under spatial compression. Others were torn apart by dimensional rifts that opened in their hulls. Still others found themselves suddenly existing in two places at once, their structures ripping themselves apart from the contradiction. Peter Collins guided the ship through maneuvers that would have killed any normal pilot. The enhanced navigation systems fed directly into his mind, allowing him to think the ship through space rather than simply steering her. He had never felt so alive. Maria Santos managed the communication channels, jamming signals and intercepting their panicked transmissions. She heard their commanders screaming for help. She heard their crews crying out in terror. Part of her felt satisfaction. These were the creatures who had killed her parents, but another part felt something else. These were living beings, dying in fear and confusion. Even enemies deserved some measure of pity. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the fleet was broken. 112 ships had been destroyed completely. Another 87 were disabled and drifting. The rest had fled, scattering in all directions, their crews too terrified to maintain formation. The devastation still floated in space, but she was powerless. The Endeavor's weapons had specifically targeted her engines and weapon systems, leaving her intact but helpless. High Commander stood on his darkened bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his crew, and watched the human ship approach. Captain Brooks hailed him. "High Commander, your fleet is destroyed. Your invasion has failed. You have 2 choices. You can surrender and be taken prisoner, or you can die here. The outcome will be the same for your people either way. The war is over." Said nothing for a long moment. His people had never been defeated like this. In all their centuries of conquest, no enemy had ever broken them so completely. He looked at the strange human ship floating before him, glowing with that soft light that seemed almost gentle despite the destruction it had caused. "Why," he finally asked, "why did you not destroy us all? You have the power, why show mercy?" Brooks considered the question. "Because we are not you," he said simply. "Because the measure of strength is not how much you can destroy, but how much you choose to preserve. We fight to protect, not to exterminate. Even our enemies deserve the chance to survive." Bowed his head, "I surrender." Across the solar system, sensors showed the results of the battle. On Mars Station, Admiral wept openly. On Earth, billions watched the feeds and screamed with joy. On colony worlds throughout human space, people who had lived in fear for years finally allowed themselves to believe that they might survive. The Endeavor had done the impossible. She had faced 300 enemy warships alone and won. Humanity would not be exterminated. The future they had feared would not come to pass. Captain Brooks looked at his crew, these extraordinary people who had followed him beyond the boundaries of reality itself. They had saved their species. They had changed the course of history. But their journey was not over. It had only begun. The weeks following the Battle of the Threshold changed everything. News of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy like fire across dry grass. Species who had watched the Dominion conquer and destroy for centuries suddenly found themselves living in a different universe. The unstoppable force had been stopped. The invincible empire had been broken. The Dominion did not survive intact. Without the fleet, without the leadership that had held their empire together through fear and force, the Dominion fractured into dozens of factions. Some swore vengeance against humanity. Most simply retreated to their core worlds and tried to rebuild. A few reached out to humanity through diplomatic channels, seeking to make peace before they became the next target. Captain Daniel Brooks worked with the United Earth Council to respond to these overtures. He advised caution but also compassion. They were not evil by nature, he explained. They had been shaped by their history, by a culture that valued strength above all else. Given time and the right conditions, they could change. Humanity should give them that chance. Not everyone agreed. There were voices calling for vengeance, demanding that humanity use its new power to destroy them completely. After years of war, after millions of deaths, the desire for revenge was understandable, but Captain Brooks spoke against it. "We did not receive the gifts of the architects so we could become what we fought against," he told the council. "If we use this power to exterminate our enemies, we become no better than them. The measure of a civilization is not how it treats its friends, but how it treats its defeated foes." The council debated for weeks. In the end, they chose the path of mercy. The who surrendered were not executed. They were not enslaved. They were given the chance to return home, to rebuild their society, to find a better way. It was a risk, but it was a risk that humanity chose to take. The Endeavor remained at Earth for 3 months after the battle. During that time, her crew worked with human scientists to transfer some of their knowledge. They could not share everything. Much of what they had learned required enhanced minds to comprehend. But they could share enough to give humanity a head start on the technologies that would shape their future. Laura Mitchell spent long hours with the engineering teams, explaining principles of energy generation that made fusion reactors look primitive. She showed them how to tap the quantum vacuum for unlimited power. She demonstrated materials that could repair themselves, computers that processed information through dimensions rather than circuits, medical devices that could heal almost any injury. It would take years for human scientists to fully understand these technologies. But they had a foundation now, a path forward that would have taken to discover on their own. Worked with the science academies, sharing theoretical frameworks that expanded human understanding of the universe. She spoke of dimensions beyond the three that humans could perceive, of time as a navigable medium rather than an inexorable flow, of consciousness as a fundamental force like gravity or electromagnetism. Her lectures drew thousands of viewers. Young scientists listened with wonder in their eyes, seeing possibilities they had never imagined. Stephen Grant helped the military develop new tactical doctrines. He could not give them weapons like the Endeavour carried, but he could teach them to think differently about warfare. Defense rather than offense. Precision rather than destruction. Victory measured in lives saved rather than enemies killed. It was a different philosophy than humanity had practiced before, but it was one that might lead to a better future. Captain Brooks spoke before the United Earth Council for the final time on a spring morning when Earth was blooming with new life. He stood before the assembled representatives of humanity and told them what came next. The architects gave us a purpose, he said. We were not sent back only to save Earth. We were sent back to carry their legacy forward. There are other species in the galaxy who face extinction. There are civilizations that need guidance, peoples who need protection. The Endeavour will travel to find them. The chamber fell silent. Everyone understood what he was saying. The crew of the Endeavour would not stay. Brooks continued, "We are no longer entirely human in the way you understand that word. We have been changed, expanded, transformed into something new. We belong to both your world and to the spaces between worlds. Our place is out there, in the darkness between stars, doing the work that the architects have prepared us for." Admiral rose from his seat. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "You saved us. You gave us a future. How can we ever repay that debt?" Brooks smiled the same smile he had worn the day he first took command of the Endeavour, so many years and so few years ago. "Live well. Build wisely. When you encounter other species, treat them with compassion. Remember that strength is not measured in weapons but in the choice to use them wisely. That is how you repay us. That is how you honor what we have given you." The crew of the Endeavour said their goodbyes in the days that followed. Peter Collins visited his family home and walked through rooms where his parents had lived and died, never knowing their son had survived. Maria Santos spent hours in the memorial garden, where the names of those killed in the war were carved in stone, including the names of her mother and father. She touched the letters and whispered that she had avenged them, but more importantly, she had helped ensure that no other child would lose their parents to weapons. Laura Mitchell returned to the engineering school where she had studied as a young woman. The buildings were different now, modernized over the decades, but the spirit was the same. She spoke to the students there, encouraging them to keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge, to never stop asking questions. Spent her final days on Earth at the observatory, where she had first fallen in love with the stars as a child. She stood beneath the dome and looked up at the sky, seeing not just points of light, but pathways to wonders beyond imagination. On the day of departure, millions gathered to watch. The Endeavour rose from Earth orbit one last time, her hull blazing with light that seemed to pulse with emotion. She climbed higher and higher, past the moon, past Mars, past the outer planets, toward the edge of the solar system. Captain Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge, surrounded by his crew, both the originals who had journeyed with him through dimensions and the young volunteers who had chosen to join their mission. He looked back at the pale blue dot that was Earth, the world that had given birth to all of them. "Goodbye," he said softly, We will not forget you, and perhaps someday we will return." The Endeavour reached the threshold of interstellar space. Her drives activated, drawing power from sources that existed beyond normal reality. Space folded around her like a closing hand. And then she was gone. On Earth, humanity looked up at the stars. They were not afraid anymore. They had allies out there, wandering the cosmos, carrying the best of humanity with them wherever they traveled. They had been given knowledge that would transform their civilization. They had been given a second chance. The universe was vast and full of wonders and dangers, but humanity was ready to face whatever came next. They had been tested in the fires of war and had emerged stronger. They had looked into the darkness and had found light. And somewhere out among the stars, a ship called Endeavour sailed on, carrying the hopes of Earth to shores no human had ever seen. The story of humanity was only beginning.